The autumn wind swept through the gardens of Thornwick Palace, carrying with it the scent of dying roses and unspoken secrets. Captain Marcus Blackwood adjusted his ceremonial sword as he walked the familiar stone corridors, his polished boots echoing against marble floors that had witnessed 3 centuries of royal intrigue. At 35, he had served the crown for 12 years, rising through the ranks to become the youngest captain of the royal guard in the kingdom's history. His loyalty to King Edmund Thornwick and Queen Isabella had never wavered, until today. The morning had started like any other. Marcus conducted his usual security briefing, reviewed patrol schedules, and inspected the guard posts that surrounded the palace grounds. The kingdom of Valdoria had been peaceful for decades, but threats could emerge from the shadows without warning. As captain, Marcus understood that vigilance was not just duty, it was survival. Queen Isabella had requested a private audience in the Rose Garden at precisely 11 o'clock. Such meetings were not uncommon. The Queen often consulted with Marcus about security matters, especially when hosting foreign dignitaries or planning public appearances. She was known throughout the kingdom for her grace, intelligence, and unwavering dedication to charitable causes. The people adored her, and Marcus respected her deeply. But something felt different today. The Queen's usually composed demeanor seemed strained during their morning greeting. Her emerald eyes, typically bright with warmth, carried shadows that hadn't been there before. She had dismissed her usual retinue of ladies-in-waiting, requesting complete privacy for their discussion. Even Sir Thomas Hartwell, her personal secretary who had served the royal family for 20 years, was asked to remain in the palace. Marcus arrived at the Rose Garden 5 minutes early, as was his custom. The garden was Isabella's sanctuary, a place where she often retreated to find peace among the carefully tended blooms. The late October air was crisp, and most of the roses had already surrendered their petals to the season, leaving behind thorny stems and the promise of spring's return. Stone benches were scattered throughout the garden, positioned to take advantage of both sunlight and privacy. The Queen appeared precisely on time, her burgundy coat flowing behind her as she walked the gravel path. Her auburn hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and, despite her obvious distress, she maintained the regal bearing that had made her beloved by the people of Valdoria. Marcus bowed respectfully as she approached, noting the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her coat. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, straightening from his bow. "You requested to see me?" Isabella gestured toward a secluded bench beneath an ancient oak tree, its branches providing natural privacy from any potential observers. "Please, Marcus. Sit with me. What I'm about to share must remain between us, at least for now." The unusual informality of her request set Marcus on edge. In all his years of service, Queen Isabella had never asked him to sit in her presence, nor had she ever used his first name without his title. Protocol was sacred in the royal household, and deviations from it usually signaled serious trouble. As they settled onto the cold stone bench, Isabella was quiet for several moments, her gaze fixed on the dormant rose bushes. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, forcing Marcus to lean closer to hear her words clearly. "Marcus, in your years of service to the crown, have you ever discovered something that challenged everything you believed about the people you've sworn to protect?" Her question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Marcus couldn't yet comprehend. "Your Majesty, I'm not sure I understand," he replied carefully, though his instincts told him that whatever Isabella was about to reveal would forever change his understanding of the royal family he had dedicated his life to serving. Isabella reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a small digital recording device, no larger than a jewelry box. Her fingers shook as she placed it on the bench between them, as if the device itself carried dangerous power. 3 days ago, I was in the king's private study, looking for a book he had borrowed from my personal library. Edmund was away on his hunting trip to the northern estates, and I thought it would be harmless to retrieve it myself." Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, though Marcus could see the emotional toll the revelation was taking on her. "While searching through his desk, something I've never done before, I assure you, I accidentally activated a recording device hidden in the drawer. It appears Edmund has been documenting private conversations, meetings that I knew nothing about." Isabella's hands clenched into fists in her lap, and Marcus noticed tears beginning to form in her eyes. The implications of what she was saying began to dawn on Marcus. If the king had been secretly recording conversations, it suggested a level of paranoia and mistrust that went against everything Marcus believed about Edmund's character. The king had always been straightforward, honest, and transparent in his dealings with both his family and his advisors. "Your Majesty, what exactly did you hear on these recordings?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't certain he wanted to know the answer. Isabella activated the recording device with a trembling finger. "Listen for yourself, Marcus. But, prepare yourself, what you're about to hear will change everything." The device crackled to life, and, through the small speaker came the unmistakable voice of King Edmund, speaking in hushed, urgent tones to an unknown companion. The conversation appeared to be taking place in the king's private chamber, based on the familiar background sounds Marcus had heard during his many security briefings in that room. "The Northern Rebellion must be crushed completely," Edmund's voice came through clearly. "I don't care what methods are necessary. Use whatever force is required to ensure they never rise against us again." A second voice, which Marcus didn't immediately recognize, responded, "Your Majesty, the casualties could be significant. Many of these people are simply farmers who have been pushed to desperation by the recent tax increases." "Desperation breeds revolution, Lord Pemberton," the king's voice continued coldly. "Better to eliminate the threat now than face a full uprising later. I want every village leader arrested, their families questioned thoroughly until we're certain there are no additional plots brewing." Marcus felt his blood run cold. The northern provinces had indeed experienced some unrest in recent months, but his intelligence reports had indicated only minor protests over tax policy, nothing that warranted the harsh measures the king was discussing. More troubling still, Marcus had never been informed of any rebellion or plans for military action against Valdorian citizens. The recording continued, revealing details of secret meetings with military commanders, discussions of propaganda campaigns to justify harsh crackdowns, and, most disturbing of all, conversations about manipulating information to keep both the Queen and the Royal Guard uninformed about the true extent of the government's actions in the Northern Territories. "If Isabella asks about the situation in the north, tell her it's a minor administrative matter," Edmund's voice instructed. "She has too gentle a heart for the realities of ruling. And, keep Captain Blackwood focused on palace security, his moral code might conflict with what needs to be done." Isabella stopped the recording, and silence fell over the garden like a heavy blanket. Marcus stared at the device, his mind racing as he tried to process what he had just heard. The king he had sworn to protect was secretly authorizing violence against their own people while deliberately keeping his most trusted advisors in the dark. "There's more," Isabella said quietly. "Hours of recordings spanning the past 6 months. Plans for expanding military control, discussions of eliminating political opponents, arrangements with foreign powers that could compromise our sovereignty." Her voice broke slightly as she continued. "Marcus, I don't recognize the man in these recordings. This isn't the Edmund I married, the king I believed was leading our nation with honor and justice." Marcus stood abruptly from the bench, his mind struggling to reconcile his loyalty to the crown with the evidence of King Edmund's betrayal of the very principles the monarchy was supposed to represent. For 12 years, he had based his service on the belief that protecting the royal family meant protecting the people of Valdoria. Now he was learning that protecting the king might mean becoming complicit in actions that harmed innocent citizens. "Your Majesty, what do you want me to do with this information?" he asked, his voice strained with the weight of the decision he knew he would have to make. Isabella looked up at him with eyes full of pain and determination. "I want to do what's right, Marcus. But I need to know that someone I trust will stand with me, regardless of what that choice might cost us both." The autumn wind picked up, rustling the bare branches above them and carrying away the last fallen leaves of the season. Marcus understood that whatever decision he made in this moment would define not only his future but, potentially, the fate of the entire kingdom. The man who had walked into this garden was a loyal servant of the crown. The man who would leave it would be something else entirely, either a protector of justice or a guardian of terrible secrets. As he looked into Queen Isabella's pleading eyes, Marcus realized that his real test of loyalty was just beginning. The question was no longer whether he would serve the crown, but which version of it deserved his protection, the idealized monarchy he had believed in, or the flawed but genuine people who were trying to save their kingdom from corruption within its very heart. 3 days passed before Marcus could bring himself to make contact with Queen Isabella again. The weight of what he had learned in the Rose Garden pressed down on him like a physical burden, affecting his sleep, his appetite, and his ability to perform his duties with the same unwavering confidence that had defined his career. Every interaction with King Edmund felt like a performance, requiring him to maintain the facade of loyal ignorance while his mind churned with knowledge of the monarch's secret activities. The palace felt different now, as if the very walls were complicit in deception. Conversations with fellow guards took on new meaning as Marcus found himself analyzing every word for hidden agendas. When Sir Robert Ashford, the deputy captain, mentioned increased military activity in the northern provinces, Marcus had to fight to keep his expression neutral. When King Edmund praised the guards for maintaining peace and order during their daily briefing, Marcus felt the bitter taste of irony in his mouth. On the fourth night after his meeting with Isabella, Marcus made his decision. He waited until the evening guard rotation was complete and the palace had settled into its nighttime routine. Using his master keys and knowledge of the security patrol schedules, he made his way through the servants' corridors to Queen Isabella's private apartments. The risk of being discovered was significant, but the burden of carrying this secret alone had become unbearable. Isabella's personal study was a warm, inviting space filled with books on philosophy, history, and social reform. Unlike the formal grandeur of the public royal chambers, this room reflected the queen's personal interests and intellectual pursuits. Portraits of previous queens lined the walls, women who had faced their own crises of conscience and decisions that shaped the kingdom's history. Marcus found himself wondering what advice they might offer to their successor. Isabella was waiting for him, as if she had somehow known he would come. She wore a simple blue dress instead of her usual formal attire, and her hair hung loose around her shoulders, making her appear younger and more vulnerable than the composed public figure the kingdom knew. The recording device sat on her desk beside a leather-bound journal and several loose papers covered with her handwriting. "I wasn't sure you would come," she said softly, gesturing for Marcus to take a seat in one of the comfortable armchairs positioned near the fireplace. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you showed me," Marcus replied, settling into the chair but remaining alert. Even in the Queen's private chambers, walls had ears in the palace. "Your Majesty, I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with before I can advise you on the best course of action." Isabella nodded and retrieved the journal from her desk. "I've spent the past 3 days listening to every recording I could find. Marcus, what we heard in the garden was just the beginning. The corruption goes deeper than either of us imagined." She opened the journal to reveal pages of meticulous notes, dates, names, and summaries of conversations that painted a picture of systematic abuse of power spanning months. As Isabella read from her notes, Marcus felt his understanding of the kingdom's recent history shift dramatically. The grain shortages that had affected several rural provinces weren't the result of poor weather, as had been publicly announced. According to the recordings, King Edmund had deliberately restricted food distribution to areas that had shown political resistance to new tax policies. The goal was to create dependence on government aid, making the population more compliant and less likely to organize opposition movements. The mining accident in the eastern mountains that had killed 17 workers wasn't the tragic industrial accident it had been portrayed as in the official reports. The recordings revealed that safety inspections had been deliberately delayed and warnings ignored in order to maintain production quotas that benefited the Crown's business partnerships with foreign mining companies. Most disturbing of all were the recordings documenting King Edmund's correspondence with Prince Victor of the neighboring kingdom of Ashenhall. Victor was known throughout the region as a ruthless autocrat who had consolidated power by eliminating political opponents and suppressing civil liberties. The conversations between Edmund and Victor suggested an alliance that went beyond normal diplomatic relations. They were sharing tactics for population control and discussing mutual support for maintaining authoritarian rule. "There's something else," Isabella said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She flipped to a page near the back of her journal, where her normally neat handwriting became shaky and urgent. "I found recordings of conversations between Edmund and Lord Pemberton about me." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike as Isabella continued. "They've been discussing ways to limit my public appearances and reduce my influence over charitable organizations. Edmund believes my work with literacy programs and healthcare initiatives makes the people too independent, too willing to question government policies. the implications were staggering. Queen Isabella's charitable work had made her beloved throughout the kingdom, and her genuine connection with common citizens had strengthened the monarchy's relationship with the people. If King Edmund saw her compassion and public service as a threat to his authority, it suggested a level of paranoia and hunger for absolute control that bordered on madness. But the most frightening recording, Isabella continued, was a conversation from just last week. Edmund was discussing the possibility of having me declared mentally unfit to serve as queen. Lord Pemberton was researching the legal precedents for removing a monarch's spouse from public life. Marcus stood abruptly, his soldier's instincts kicking in as the full danger of the situation became clear. Your Majesty, if the king is considering such drastic action against you, then we're not just dealing with political corruption. This is a direct threat to your safety and well-being. Isabella closed the journal and looked directly into Marcus's eyes. I know the risks, Marcus. But I also know that if I do nothing, if I remain silent and complicit, then I become responsible for every innocent person who suffers because of Edmund's actions. The question is whether you're willing to help me find a way to stop this before it goes any further. The fireplace crackled softly as Marcus considered the magnitude of what Isabella was asking. Opposing the king wasn't just treason, it was a step into uncharted territory that could lead to civil war, foreign invasion, or the complete collapse of the monarchy that had provided stability to Valdoria for 300 years. What exactly are you proposing, Your Majesty? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Isabella stood and walked to a tall window that overlooked the palace gardens. In the moonlight, the formal landscaping looked almost ethereal, a reminder of the beauty and order that the royal family was supposed to protect and preserve. I'm proposing that we gather evidence, document everything we can find, and present it to the High Council, she said. The Council has the constitutional authority to remove a monarch who has violated their oath to serve the people's interests. It's an extreme measure that hasn't been invoked in over 2 centuries, but the legal framework exists. Marcus joined her at the window, considering the practical challenges of such an unprecedented action. Your Majesty, the High Council consists of 12 members, most of whom have been appointed by King Edmund himself. Lord Pemberton sits on the council, as do several other nobles who appear to be involved in these secret activities. We would need absolute proof and the support of members who are still loyal to the true principles of the monarchy. I know, Isabella replied. That's why I need time to investigate further, to identify which council members can be trusted and which ones are complicit. And I need someone with your access and expertise to help me gather the evidence we'll need to make our case. The weight of decision pressed down on Marcus like a physical force. Everything he had been trained for, every oath he had sworn, every principle that had guided his career was being tested in this moment. Loyalty to the crown had always been straightforward when the crown represented justice and the protection of the innocent. But what happened when loyalty to the crown meant betraying loyalty to the kingdom itself? If we move forward with this plan, Marcus said carefully, we'll be placing ourselves in mortal danger. King Edmund has already shown he's willing to use violence against his own people. If he discovers what we're doing, neither your royal status nor my position will protect us. Isabella turned to face him, and Marcus saw in her expression the same steely determination that had made her a beloved queen and effective advocate for the kingdom's most vulnerable citizens. Marcus, I've spent 12 years as queen trying to serve the people of Valdoria with honor and compassion. If I remain silent now, if I choose personal safety over moral duty, then everything I've worked for becomes meaningless. I would rather face whatever consequences come from fighting for what's right than live with the knowledge that I stood by while innocent people suffered. In that moment, Marcus understood that Queen Isabella wasn't just asking for his help, she was offering him the chance to become the kind of man and soldier he had always believed himself to be. The choice wasn't between loyalty and treason, but between different definitions of what true loyalty meant. What do you need me to do? He asked, and, with those words, Captain Marcus Blackwood crossed a line from which there would be no return. Isabella smiled for the first time since their conversation in the rose garden, and Marcus glimpsed the strength and courage that had made her the heart of the kingdom. Help me save our country, she said simply. Even if it means destroying everything we've known to do it. 2 weeks into their covert investigation, Marcus and Queen Isabella had developed a careful routine of secret meetings and evidence gathering that required all of Marcus's military training and Isabella's diplomatic skills to maintain. They communicated through a series of subtle signals during public appearances. A particular arrangement of flowers in Isabella's morning bouquet indicated when she had new recordings to share, while Marcus used the positioning of guards during ceremonial events to signal when he had discovered information through his own channels. Marcus had begun using his security clearance to access areas of the palace that had previously been beyond his regular patrol routes. The king's private office, the sealed records room and the basement levels, and the communication center where international correspondence was processed all yielded disturbing evidence of King Edmund's expanding network of authoritarian allies and increasingly harsh domestic policies. The most significant breakthrough came when Marcus discovered that Lord Pemberton had been using the palace's diplomatic communication system to coordinate with foreign intelligence operatives. Hidden within routine trade discussions were coded messages about surveillance techniques, population control methods, and strategies for suppressing civil unrest. It became clear that King Edmund wasn't just adopting authoritarian tactics on his own, he was receiving guidance and support from experienced dictators who saw Valdoria as a testing ground for their methods. Isabella's investigation had revealed equally troubling information about the domestic front. The Queen had been using her charitable foundations network to discreetly gather information from regional administrators and local officials throughout the kingdom. What she discovered painted a picture of systematic oppression that was being carefully hidden from public view. Citizens who questioned government policies were being blacklisted from employment opportunities. Journalists who wrote articles critical of royal decisions found their publications facing sudden tax audits and regulatory challenges. Teachers who included discussions of civil rights and democratic principles in their lessons were being transferred to remote rural schools or dismissed entirely on fabricated charges of incompetence. The pattern was clear and chilling. King Edmund was methodically dismantling the democratic institutions and civil liberties that had made Valdoria a progressive, prosperous nation. He was doing it gradually and quietly, ensuring that no single action would be dramatic enough to spark widespread resistance, but the cumulative effect was the transformation of the kingdom into an authoritarian state. On a cold November evening, Marcus and Isabella met in the palace's ancient library, a vast room filled with centuries of knowledge and wisdom that seemed to mock the ignorance and cruelty they were uncovering. The library was officially closed after sunset, but Marcus's security access allowed them to use it as a secure meeting place where their conversations wouldn't be overheard by servants or guards. Isabella had prepared a comprehensive presentation of their findings, using maps, charts, and timelines to illustrate the scope of King Edmund's betrayal of his constitutional duties. As she spread the documents across a large oak table, Marcus was struck by the methodical nature of her work. The Queen had approached this investigation with the same systematic thoroughness she brought to her charitable initiatives, treating the salvation of their kingdom as another humanitarian project requiring careful planning and execution. Marcus, look at this pattern, Isabella said, pointing to a timeline she had created showing the implementation of various oppressive policies. Every major restriction on civil liberties has been introduced during times when the public was distracted by other events, natural disasters, foreign trade negotiations, royal ceremonies. Edmund has been using the traditional tools of statecraft to hide his dismantling of democratic norms. Marcus studied the timeline and felt a chill of recognition. As captain of the Royal Guard, he had been involved in planning security for many of the events Isabella had identified. Now he realized that his own professional competence had been unknowingly used to provide cover for King Edmund's authoritarian agenda. The increased security measures that Marcus had implemented for public safety had also made it easier for the government to monitor and control citizen activities. Your Majesty, we now have enough evidence to present a compelling case to the High Council, Marcus said. But we still haven't identified which council members we can trust with this information. If we approach the wrong people, we could find ourselves charged with treason before we have a chance to present our evidence. Isabella nodded grimly. I've been thinking about that problem constantly. I believe our best approach is to start with Lady Catherine Ashworth. She's the newest member of the council, appointed only 6 months ago to represent the merchant guilds. Her appointment came through the guild's traditional nomination process, not through direct royal selection, which means she's less likely to be personally loyal to Edmund.
Lady Ashworth was indeed an interesting possibility.
Marcus knew her primarily through official functions, where she had impressed him with her direct, no-nonsense approach to problem-solving and her obvious concern for the economic well-being of common citizens. Unlike many nobles who had inherited their positions, Catherine had built her own successful trading company before being selected by the merchant guilds as their representative. "There's something else about Lady Ashworth that might work in our favor," Isabella continued. "Her trading business has extensive connections throughout the northern provinces. If anyone has first-hand knowledge of the real conditions in areas where Edmund has been implementing his harshest policies, it would be her."
Marcus considered the strategic implications of approaching Lady Ashworth first.
If she agreed to help them, her merchant network could provide additional evidence and possibly serve as a communication system for coordinating resistance to King Edmund's rule. If she refused to help, or worse, if she reported their activities to the king, they would at least know immediately that their position was compromised.
"How do you propose we make contact with Lady Ashworth?" Marcus asked. "Any direct approach carries significant risk."
Isabella smiled slightly, displaying the diplomatic creativity that had made her effective in international negotiations.
"Next week is the annual Harvest Festival celebration. Lady Ashworth always attends the traditional merchants' dinner on the second evening of the festival.
I'll arrange to visit the merchant district that afternoon for what will appear to be a routine inspection of festival preparations. During my tour, I'll request a private meeting with Lady Ashworth to discuss expanding royal support for small trading businesses."
The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Queen Isabella's interest in supporting economic development was well documented and would provide perfect cover for a private conversation.
If their meeting was observed, it would appear to be exactly the kind of outreach that had made Isabella popular with merchants and craftspeople throughout the kingdom. "I'll coordinate security for your visit to ensure we have maximum privacy," Marcus offered. "I can arrange for the regular palace guards to handle perimeter security while I personally escort you to the meeting. That will minimize the number of people who might overhear your conversation with Lady Ashworth." As they finalized their plans for approaching Lady Ashworth, Marcus felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. They were moving from the relatively safe activity of gathering evidence to the much more dangerous phase of building active resistance to King Edmund's rule. Once they shared their information with Lady Ashworth, there would be no way to retreat back into ignorance and compliance. "Isabella," Marcus said, using the Queen's first name for the first time in their relationship, "once we take this step, everything changes. Win or lose, succeed or fail, we'll have committed ourselves to a path that leads either to the salvation of our kingdom or to our own destruction." Isabella looked up from the documents spread across the library table, her green eyes reflecting both the weight of responsibility and an unshakable resolve. "Marcus, 3 weeks ago I was the wife of a king I respected, living in a palace I thought represented justice and honor. Now I know that my husband has become a tyrant and my home has become the headquarters for oppressing the people I swore to serve. The change has already happened. Now we're just deciding whether to fight for what's right or surrender to what's wrong." Outside the library windows, snow had begun to fall, covering the palace grounds in a pristine white blanket that would be gone by morning. Marcus watched the snowflakes swirl in the lamplight and thought about the temporary nature of beauty and peace. Everything could change overnight, kingdoms could fall, leaders could reveal their true nature, and ordinary people could be called upon to make extraordinary choices. "Then, we move forward," he said. "And, may heaven help us all." Isabella began gathering their documents, carefully organizing them for secure storage until their meeting with Lady Ashworth. As she worked, she spoke quietly, almost to herself. "You know, Marcus, I used to believe that the hardest part of being queen was maintaining dignity during boring ceremonial functions. Now I understand that the hardest part is discovering you have the power to save your people, but only if you're willing to risk losing everything to do it." Marcus helped her secure the evidence in a hidden compartment behind one of the library's ancient volumes, a hiding place that had probably concealed secrets for centuries. As they prepared to leave separately to maintain the appearance of chance encounters, Marcus realized that regardless of what happened in the coming weeks, he had already been fundamentally changed by this experience. For the first time in his career, he wasn't serving the crown out of duty and tradition. He was serving justice out of choice and conviction. The difference felt like the difference between following orders and following his conscience, between being a good soldier and being a good man. As Queen Isabella slipped quietly out of the library, returning to the royal chambers where she would have to sleep beside the man whose betrayal she was working to expose, Marcus remained behind for a few minutes, surrounded by centuries of accumulated wisdom and knowledge. He found himself wondering what future historians would write about these days, and whether they would understand the impossible choices that ordinary people sometimes had to make in extraordinary times. Tomorrow they would begin the most dangerous phase of their mission. Tonight, Marcus allowed himself one last moment of uncertainty before committing fully to the path they had chosen. By the time he extinguished the library lamps and made his way back through the darkened corridors, his doubts had been replaced by grim determination.
The kingdom of Valdoria was worth fighting for.
The people deserved leaders who served their interests rather than exploiting their loyalty. And, sometimes, Marcus reflected as he prepared for what might be his last peaceful night's sleep for some time to come, the greatest act of loyalty to the crown was ensuring it remained worthy of the people's trust. The harvest festival dawned crisp and clear, with golden sunlight streaming through the bare branches of the palace's ancient oak trees. The festival had been celebrated in Valdoria for over 400 years, representing the kingdom's agricultural heritage and the bond between the royal family and the common people who sustained the nation through their labor and loyalty. Under normal circumstances, Marcus would have found the festival preparations energizing and meaningful. Today, they felt like an elaborate charade concealing the rot that had infected the heart of the kingdom. Queen Isabella's visit to the merchant district proceeded exactly as planned. She arrived at midday accompanied by her usual small entourage, including Marcus as her personal security detail, Sir Thomas Hartwell as her secretary, and Lady Margaret Cavington, her chief lady-in-waiting. To any observer, it appeared to be exactly the kind of public outreach that had made Isabella beloved throughout the kingdom, a genuine interest in the economic well-being of Valdoria's merchant class and their role in the upcoming festival celebrations. The merchant district had been decorated with colorful banners and harvest displays that transformed the normally practical commercial streets into a festive showcase of Valdoria's prosperity and cultural traditions. Merchants and craftspeople had set up elaborate booths displaying their finest goods, from hand-woven textiles to intricate metalwork to preserved foods that would sustain families through the coming winter months. The atmosphere should have been joyful, but Marcus noticed subtle signs of tension and worry that spoke to the broader problems affecting the kingdom. Several shop owners seemed nervous when greeting Queen Isabella, their usual warmth tempered by uncertainty about how their words might be interpreted by government officials. Marcus observed conversations that ended abruptly when royal party members approached, and he noticed that many of the traditional political banners and slogans that usually decorated festival displays were absent this year. The message was clear: even during a celebration of abundance and community, people were beginning to feel the pressure of King Edmund's increasing authoritarianism. Lady Catherine Ashworth's trading company occupied a prominent corner building in the heart of the merchant district, its three-story structure housing both business offices and a public showroom that displayed goods from across the region. Catherine had built her company from a single cart operation into one of the most successful trading enterprises in the kingdom, earning respect not only for her business acumen but also for her fair treatment of employees and her commitment to supporting smaller merchants and local artisans.
When Queen Isabella's party arrived at the Ashworth Trading Company, Catherine emerged from the main entrance to greet them personally.
She was a woman in her early 40s, with prematurely silver hair that she wore pulled back in a practical bun and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with calculating precision. Unlike many nobles who had inherited their wealth and positions, Catherine carried herself with the confident directness of someone who had earned her success through personal effort and skill. "Your Majesty, you honor my humble establishment with your presence," Catherine said, offering a respectful bow that was neither servile nor overly formal. "I understand you're interested in discussing ways the Crown might support expanding trade opportunities for smaller merchants." "Indeed, Lady Ashworth," Isabella replied smoothly. "I've been reviewing reports about economic conditions throughout the kingdom, and I believe there may be opportunities for royal initiatives that could benefit both merchants and the broader community. Perhaps we could speak privately about some specific ideas I've been considering?" The request for privacy was delivered so naturally that it would have seemed routine to any casual observer. Catherine nodded and gestured toward her private office on the building's second floor, while Marcus smoothly positioned himself to provide security and ensure their conversation wouldn't be interrupted or overheard.
Catherine's office reflected her practical, results-oriented approach to business.
Maps of trade routes covered the walls, and her desk was organized with neat stacks of correspondence, account ledgers, and reports from regional representatives. What immediately caught Marcus's attention, however, were several letters bearing official seals from northern provincial administrators, exactly the regions where King Edmund's oppressive policies had been most harshly implemented. Lady Ashworth, Isabella began once the office door was closed and Marcus had confirmed they had privacy. Before we discuss economic development opportunities, I need to address a more serious matter. I have reason to believe you may have information about conditions in the northern provinces that differs from the official reports reaching the palace. Catherine's expression shifted immediately from polite business interest to sharp attention. She studied Isabella's face carefully, clearly trying to determine whether this was a genuine inquiry or some kind of test of her loyalty to official government narratives.
Your Majesty, I'm not sure what you mean, Catherine replied cautiously.
My trading company does conduct business throughout the northern region, but I wouldn't presume to contradict official government assessments of local conditions.
Isabella recognized the diplomatic deflection and decided that directness was their only option for building trust.
She looked directly into Catherine's eyes and spoke with quiet intensity. Lady Ashworth, I have discovered that my husband has been implementing policies in the northern provinces that involve systematic oppression of local populations, including violence against peaceful protesters and deliberate restriction of food supplies to create political compliance. I believe you have first-hand knowledge of these activities, and I need to know the truth about what's happening to our people.
The office fell silent except for the distant sounds of festival preparations continuing in the street below.
Catherine stared at Queen Isabella for a long moment, clearly struggling with the implications of what she had just heard. Finally, she walked to her desk and retrieved a locked metal box from the bottom drawer. Your Majesty, what I'm about to show you could be considered treasonous if it falls into the wrong hands, Catherine said quietly. But I've been documenting conditions in the northern provinces because I believe someone needs to bear witness to what's happening there. She opened the metal box to reveal dozens of letters, photographs, and detailed reports from her business representatives throughout the northern region. As she spread the documents across her desk, Marcus felt his stomach tighten at the visual evidence of King Edmund's brutality. Photographs showed villages where homes had been burned and shops destroyed after protests against tax increases. Letters from local merchants described armed soldiers occupying town centers and arresting anyone who gathered in groups larger than 3 people. Most disturbing were the reports documenting deaths not just from violence, but from SA.